On a morning steeped in pale London mist, the cathedral rose like a solemn promise no one quite believed, its stone walls holding the weight of whispered judgments that drifted among gathered carriages and silk-clad figures. Society had come, not for celebration, but for spectacle, for rumor had sharpened every gaze into something quietly merciless. They spoke her name as though it were a fragile thing already broken, Miss Eliza Harrow, the bride who arrived not adorned in triumph, but wrapped in expectation's cold and unyielding shadow, as if fate itself had paused to witness her quiet undoing today alone. Eliza stepped from the carriage with a composure so carefully held it seemed almost fragile, her gloved hands folded as though they might betray her if left unattended. Her gown, though elegant in cut, lacked the ostentatious flourish expected of a duke's bride, and that absence spoke louder than diamonds ever could. Eyes followed her, measuring, dismissing, lingering with thinly veiled curiosity. She neither hurried nor faltered, yet something in the stillness of her gaze revealed a quiet understanding that she walked not toward joy, but into an arrangement already judged wanting by those who had never known her heart. Inside, the cathedral breathed candlelight and restrained grandeur, its vaulted ceilings echoing with the hushed cadence of polite disdain. At the altar stood Duke Adrian Blackthorne, a figure carved in authority and distance, his posture impeccable, his expression untouched by the moment that bound him. He did not look toward the entrance as she approached. Instead, his gaze remained fixed ahead, as though the ceremony were merely another duty to be endured. Those who observed him whispered that he had never been a man easily moved, yet today his stillness felt less like strength and more like quiet refusal. The vows unfolded with ceremonial precision, each word spoken as tradition required, yet stripped of warmth, as though meaning itself had been carefully set aside. When Eliza's turn came, her voice did not tremble. It carried a softness that seemed to steady the very air, drawing brief silence even from those inclined to scorn. Adrian's reply followed, low and even, his tone devoid of hesitation yet equally absent of tenderness. Their hands touched only as necessity dictated, and even that brief contact felt like a promise made without intention, witnessed by a congregation eager to remember every omission in detail. When the final blessing dissolved into muted applause, the sound felt less like celebration and more like the closing of a curtain upon something quietly tragic. Eliza inclined her head, acknowledging what courtesy demanded, while Adrian stepped aside with practiced indifference, offering his arm only because eyes required the gesture. Together they moved through the aisle, yet the space between them seemed immeasurable, filled with everything unsaid. Outside, the air had sharpened, and whispers resumed with renewed vigor, tracing their path like shadows unwilling to disperse as curious onlookers lingered to savor the spectacle of a union already undone in spirit. In the privacy of a small antechamber, removed from the performance of society, silence settled with a weight far heavier than any accusation. Eliza stood near the window, her reflection faint against the pale glass, as though she were already becoming a memory. Adrian remained by the door, his distance deliberate, his gaze finally resting upon her with something unreadable beneath its restraint. For a moment, neither spoke, and in that suspended quiet, the truth of their marriage revealed itself more clearly than any vow had dared to expose the fragile emptiness binding them together in name alone this day. It was he who spoke first, his voice controlled, almost courteous in its detachment, as though delivering a necessary but regrettable announcement. He did not approach her, nor soften the space between them. Instead, he said, with a clarity that permitted no misinterpretation, that he had erred in agreeing to this union, that circumstances had compelled him, and that she was under no obligation to remain within a life he had never intended to share. The words fell without cruelty, yet their precision cut deeper than any raised voice could have achieved in devastation she could neither deflect nor deny. Eliza received his declaration without visible collapse, though something within her seemed to settle into a deeper stillness, like water undisturbed after a stone has sunk beyond sight. She turned to face him fully then, her expression composed, her dignity intact in a way that rendered pity almost irrelevant. When she answered, her tone was gentle, neither pleading nor offended, simply resolute in its acceptance. She assured him that she would not impose upon his household, nor claim a place that had never been offered in earnest, and that she would arrange her departure without burdening him further at all. For the briefest instant, something shifted in Adrian's gaze, a flicker so subtle it might have been dismissed as illusion, yet it lingered long enough to suggest that her composure unsettled him more than tears ever could. He inclined his head, accepting her words as one might accept an inevitable outcome, and stepped aside to grant her passage. No attempt was made to detain her, no reconsideration offered, only that same unyielding restraint. Yet as she moved toward the door, the silence behind her carried a weight that felt unfinished, as though something essential had been left unspoken between them. She reached the corridor just as a servant approached, hesitant yet insistent, bearing a sealed letter marked unmistakably with the Duke's crest. Eliza paused, confusion threading through her otherwise steady composure, and accepted it with quiet thanks. When she turned back, Adrian's expression hardened with genuine surprise, his voice firm as he denied sending any such message. The wax seal remained unbroken, its presence a contradiction neither of them could explain. And in that moment, as uncertainty replaced finality, the fragile ending they had both accepted began, almost imperceptibly, to unravel into something far more dangerous than either had imagined. The letter remained unopened long after the servant's footsteps had faded, its weight disproportionate to its size, as though it carried not words but consequence. Eliza stood in the corridor, the distant murmur of departing guests dissolving into silence, while Adrian watched her with a sharpened stillness that betrayed neither curiosity nor ease. His denial had been immediate, unembellished, and yet the seal bore his unmistakable crest, pressed in wax with authority no servant would dare counterfeit. It was the first fracture in the certainty he had so carefully maintained, and it lingered between them like an uninvited witness. "I suggest you open it," he said at last, though the suggestion carried the quiet tension of command restrained. Eliza inclined her head slightly, her fingers steady as she broke the seal, revealing a single sheet within. Her eyes moved across the lines, and though her expression did not falter, something softened, no shifted, in her gaze as if the words reached a place she had thought already sealed against expectation. She folded the letter once more before speaking. "It contains no signature," she said gently. "Only a line. You deserved a gentler beginning." Adrian's brow tightened almost imperceptibly. "A sentiment I did not write," he replied, though his voice carried the faintest edge of unease. "Perhaps not," Eliza answered, her tone neither accusing nor speculative, "yet it arrives under your name." The ambiguity lingered, unresolved, and with it, a subtle alteration in the air between them, something no longer entirely dismissible. Adrian gestured toward the staircase with restrained impatience. "You will remain here until arrangements are made. It would invite unnecessary scrutiny to depart immediately." She accepted this without protest, though the acceptance felt less like compliance and more like a quiet postponement of something inevitable. The estate awaited her not as a home, but as a pause, an interval defined by uncertainty rather than belonging. Blackthorne House loomed with austere grandeur, its corridors long and dimly lit, its silence too complete to be mistaken for peace. Eliza moved through its spaces like a careful observer, neither claiming nor rejecting them, her presence acknowledged by servants with measured politeness that concealed their curiosity poorly. The letter remained with her, tucked safely among her few belongings, its words echoing in moments of stillness, refusing to be dismissed as coincidence or trivial sentiment. The following morning brought the first of the gifts. It arrived without announcement, placed upon a small table near her chamber window, where pale light revealed its quiet significance. A book, finely bound in worn leather, its title embossed in gold that had softened with age. Eliza approached it slowly, as though uncertain whether it belonged to her at all. When she opened it, the scent of aged paper rose faintly, and within its margins, delicate annotations traced a reader's thoughtful hand, reflections, questions, fragments of feeling preserved between lines of verse. There was no accompanying note, no explanation, only the unmistakable impression of intimacy offered without identity. She sought Adrian that afternoon, finding him in the study where daylight filtered through tall windows, illuminating the severe order of his surroundings. He did not look up immediately, as though her presence required no acknowledgement beyond its inevitability. "A book has been sent to my chamber," she began, her voice composed yet quietly probing. "Annotated with care." He turned a page before answering. "Then it was placed there in error." "I believe not," she replied, stepping further into the room. "It appears chosen." Adrian's gaze lifted at last, cool and assessing. "You presume intent where none exists." "And yet," she said softly, "someone intends me to believe otherwise." For a moment their silence held, not hostile, but charged with something less defined, a question neither could answer without conceding ground. Adrian rose then, his movements deliberate. "You will not concern yourself with anonymous gestures. They are inconsequential." "Inconsequential things rarely arrive with such care," Eliza answered, her calmness unbroken. He did not respond, though his expression suggested a resistance that felt less certain than before. The days unfolded with a peculiar rhythm, each marked by the arrival of another object, each more personal than the last. A brooch of delicate sapphire, unmistakably of noble origin, left upon her dressing table as though it had always belonged there. Fresh white roses placed in a crystal vase at dawn, their petals unblemished, their fragrance soft yet persistent. Each item carried the same silent insistence, the same absence of explanation, binding them together with a thread of intention that defied dismissal. And always Adrian denied them. At dinner, his tone remained unchanged, his composure intact, yet something in his gaze had begun to shift. Not warmth, not even curiosity, but a subtle vigilance, as though he too felt the edges of his control beginning to loosen. "You encourage speculation," he said one evening, his voice measured as he observed the brooch at her collar. "I wear what is given," Eliza replied, meeting his gaze with quiet steadiness. "By whom?" he asked. "That," she said, her voice almost thoughtful, "is the question you seem unwilling to answer." His jaw tightened, though no reply followed. It was not long before society took notice. The invitations resumed, cautious at first, then insistent, drawing them into spaces where observation sharpened into judgment. At a grand ball held beneath glittering chandeliers, Eliza entered beside Adrian, her presence no longer dismissed, but scrutinized with renewed intensity. The sapphire brooch caught the light with each movement, its brilliance undeniable, its implication impossible to ignore. Whispers gathered like a rising tide. "She wears the late Duchess's jewels." "Then the Duke favors her more than he admits." "Or she has learned how to secure what was never offered." Lady Beatrice Holloway approached with practiced elegance, her smile precise enough to wound. "How fortunate you are, Mrs. Blackthorne," she said, her tone edged with sweetness sharpened by intent. "Such heirlooms are not easily acquired." Eliza inclined her head, her composure unwavering. "Fortune rarely asks permission." "Nor does ambition," Lady Beatrice replied, her gaze lingering pointedly on the brooch. "Though one must wonder which is at play." A pause followed, delicate and dangerous. Then Adrian spoke, his voice cutting cleanly through the tension. "My wife requires neither your speculation nor your concern, Lady Beatrice." The words landed with quiet force, altering the balance of the moment. For the first time, his defense was not reluctant, not obligatory but deliberate. Eliza felt it then, not reassurance but a shift, subtle and undeniable. Yet as the evening waned and they returned to the carriage, the distance between them remained, altered yet unresolved. Adrian did not speak, though his silence no longer felt dismissive, but burdened with something he had yet to name. Later, alone once more, Eliza opened the book again, her fingers tracing the annotations with thoughtful care. It was then she noticed what she had missed before, a small marking near the spine, nearly invisible, pressed into the leather with deliberate subtlety. A crest. Not Adrian's. And beneath it, faintly inscribed, words so carefully hidden they seemed never meant to be found. "I know what he cannot say." Eliza closed the book slowly, the weight of its meaning settling with quiet certainty, as the fragile boundary between truth and deception began at last to dissolve. The revelation did not arrive with noise, but with a quiet certainty that settled into Eliza's thoughts like a shadow she could neither dispel nor fully grasp. The hidden crest, the carefully inscribed words, the deliberate anonymity, none of it aligned with coincidence, and yet none of it pointed cleanly toward a truth she could name. She closed the book with measured care, her pulse steady despite the unsettling implications, and for the first time since her arrival she felt not merely observed, but deliberately guided by an unseen hand that understood far more than it revealed. Sleep eluded her that night, not from fear, but from a restless awareness that something within the house had shifted. The silence no longer felt empty, it seemed to listen. By morning, her resolve had settled into quiet determination, and she sought Adrian not as a wife seeking permission, but as a woman unwilling to remain an unknowing participant in her own circumstance. She found him in the library, where the air carried the faint scent of aged wood and restrained solitude, a space that seemed to mirror the guarded nature of its master. "You told me to disregard the gifts," she began, her voice calm, though its steadiness carried a sharpened edge of intent. "I find I cannot." Adrian did not look up immediately, his attention fixed upon a document before him, yet the slight pause in his movement revealed that her words had reached him. "Then you will learn in time that not every curiosity requires satisfaction," he replied, his tone composed, though faintly strained beneath its surface. "I have learned," she answered quietly, stepping further into the room, "that ignorance is rarely a kindness when it is imposed." His gaze lifted then, meeting hers with a stillness that felt more guarded than indifferent. "And what is it you believe has been imposed upon you, Mrs. Blackthorne?" "The absence of truth," she said, her words unadorned. "And perhaps the presence of it, disguised." A flicker passed through his expression, too brief to define, yet too deliberate to dismiss. He rose slowly, closing the distance between them with measured restraint, as though proximity itself required careful negotiation. "You assume there is something to uncover," he said. "There may be nothing at all." "And yet," Eliza replied, holding his gaze without challenge or submission, "someone believes otherwise." Silence followed, not empty but weighted with something unspoken. Adrian turned away first, his attention shifting toward the window where pale daylight pressed faintly against the glass. "This house," he said after a moment, "has known many occupants, not all of whom respected its boundaries. You would be wise not to assign meaning where history alone may suffice." "History does not leave roses at dawn," she answered, her tone gentle, though firm in its quiet reasoning. He exhaled slowly, the sound almost imperceptible, yet it carried a tension that had begun to surface more frequently in her presence. "You persist," he said. "I endure," she corrected softly. "Persistence implies intent. I have only questions." His gaze returned to her, sharper now, though not unkind. "And if those questions lead you somewhere unwelcome? Then at least I will have arrived by my own choosing," she replied. The exchange lingered between them, not confrontational but undeniably altered. Something in her refusal to retreat had unsettled the careful distance he maintained, not enough to break it, but enough to reveal its fragility. That evening, a storm gathered beyond the estate, its distant thunder echoing through corridors that seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. Eliza remained in her chamber, the book resting open before her, its annotations now familiar enough to feel almost conversational. There was intelligence in them, restraint, a voice that revealed itself only through suggestion rather than declaration. It was not Adrian's voice, of that she had grown certain, but it was not entirely separate from him either, as though it existed in relation to something he had once been or refused to become. A knock sounded, measured and deliberate. She turned, expecting a servant, but it was Adrian who entered, his presence filling the room with a quiet authority that felt less distant than before. The storm's low rumble framed the moment, lending it an intimacy neither had invited. "You have continued to receive these items," he said, his gaze moving briefly to the book before returning to her. "Despite my instruction." "I was unaware that acceptance required permission," she replied, her tone even, though softened by the unexpected nature of his visit. He stepped further inside, closing the door behind him, the gesture subtle yet significant. "It requires caution," he said. "Something you do not appear inclined to exercise." "And you," she answered, "appear inclined to avoid what you cannot explain." The words did not provoke anger, but they did not pass without effect. Adrian's expression shifted, not into irritation, but into something more conflicted, as though her observation had struck closer to truth than he wished to acknowledge. "You believe I know more than I admit," he said. "I believe," Eliza replied carefully, "that you have chosen silence where clarity might have been offered." He studied her then, not as one observes an inconvenience, but as one attempts to understand something newly revealed. The distance between them felt altered again, not erased, but diminished by something neither could fully define. "There are matters," he said slowly, "that do not lend themselves to simple explanation." "Then offer a complicated one," she said, her voice quiet, though unwavering. For a moment, it seemed he might refuse, retreat once more into the safety of detachment. But instead, he spoke, his words measured, yet carrying a weight that had not been present before. "This marriage," he said, "was not arranged solely for obligation. There were expectations placed upon it beyond the obvious." Eliza did not interrupt, though her attention sharpened. "I was led to believe," he continued, "that your presence here would resolve certain complications. That your family's connection to this house held significance I was not fully given leave to question." "And now?" she asked softly. "Now," he said, his voice tightening almost imperceptibly, "I find that I was not the only one kept uninformed." The admission lingered, fragile in its honesty. "Then we are both strangers to the truth," Eliza said, her tone gentler now, not accusatory but reflective. Adrian's gaze held hers, something unguarded flickering briefly beneath his restraint. "Perhaps," he said. A crash of thunder broke the moment, sharp and immediate, and with it came the sound of something falling somewhere within the house, a distant, unmistakable disturbance that shattered the fragile stillness they had begun to share. They both turned toward the door instinctively, the tension between them replaced by a different kind of urgency. "What was that?" Eliza asked. Adrian did not answer immediately, his expression hardening with something far more certain than before. At last he said, "Something that was not meant to be found." And in that instant, the house no longer felt like a place of quiet mystery, but of deliberate concealment, as the truth they had both begun to seek threatened at last to reveal itself. The echo of the fallen object did not fade quickly. It reverberated through the corridors like a disturbance long delayed, as though the house itself had finally exhaled a secret it could no longer contain. Adrian moved first, his composure sharpening into decisive urgency, while Eliza followed without hesitation, her earlier restraint giving way to a quiet resolve that no longer permitted distance. Whatever had been concealed was no longer content to remain hidden, and in that moment, neither of them wished to retreat from what had begun. They descended into the lesser-used wing of the estate, where shadows gathered more densely and the air carried the faint scent of disuse. A door stood ajar at the end of the corridor, its lock broken, its authority quietly violated. Adrian paused only briefly before pushing it open, revealing a study long abandoned, its surfaces veiled in dust, its silence now fractured by intrusion. Papers lay scattered across the floor, disturbed as though someone had searched in haste, leaving disorder where once there had been deliberate concealment. Eliza stepped inside, her gaze moving not with fear, but with recognition, as though something within the room aligned with the unspoken tension she had felt since her arrival. "This was no accident," she said softly. "No," Adrian replied, his voice low, controlled, though something beneath it had shifted irreversibly. "Someone has been here." He crossed the room, lifting a fallen document, his eyes scanning its contents before tightening with unmistakable clarity. Eliza approached, not intruding but present, and he did not dismiss her. Instead, he handed the paper to her without hesitation, a gesture that marked a subtle but profound change. The ink had faded slightly with time, yet its meaning remained precise. It detailed transactions, agreements, signatures, arrangements that spoke not of duty but of manipulation. At the center of it all was her father's name, not as a debtor, but as a man who had negotiated something far more intricate than either of them had been led to believe. "This was no settlement," Eliza murmured, her voice steady despite the revelation. "It was an exchange." Adrian watched her closely. An exchange of what? She met his gaze, her composure unwavering even as the truth settled into place. "Of influence, of position, perhaps even of control." A silence followed, heavy not with uncertainty, but with realization. The marriage had not been a reluctant solution to a debt, it had been a calculated move within a design neither of them had fully seen. "And the gifts," Adrian said, his tone sharpening, "the letters, they are not random." "No," Eliza replied. "They are guiding us." "Toward what?" he demanded. Before she could answer, a voice broke through the tension, smooth and deliberate. "Toward the truth you were never meant to uncover together." They turned as one. Lady Beatrice Holloway stood in the doorway, her presence composed, her expression carrying none of the sweetness she displayed in society. There was no pretense now, no polite veneer, only quiet triumph sharpened by patience. "You have been persistent," she continued, stepping into the room with measured elegance. "More than I anticipated." Adrian's posture shifted, not into anger but into something far more controlled. "You arranged this," he said, not as a question but as a conclusion. Lady Beatrice inclined her head slightly. "Arranged is such a blunt term. I prefer orchestrated." Eliza remained still, her gaze fixed upon the woman who had once wielded humiliation so casually. "The gifts," she said. "The messages. They were yours." "Of course," Lady Beatrice replied. "Did you truly believe the Duke capable of such sentiment?" The remark was deliberate, designed to wound, yet Adrian did not react. His attention remained unwavering. "Why?" he asked. A faint smile touched her lips, though it held no warmth. "Because this house, this title, this legacy, was never meant to fall into uncertain hands. Your marriage threatened balance, your grace. It required intervention." "By deception?" Eliza asked. "By necessity," Lady Beatrice corrected. "You see, your father understood the value of influence. He positioned you here not as a daughter to be secured, but as a means to secure something far greater. And you sought to expose it," Adrian said. "I sought to control it," she replied calmly. "To ensure that what was built through careful negotiation was not undone by sentiment." Eliza stepped forward then, not in defiance but in quiet certainty. You miscalculated. Lady Beatrice's gaze flickered, just briefly. Did I? You believed distance would weaken us, Eliza continued. That confusion would divide us. Instead, it revealed the truth neither of us had been given. Adrian spoke then, his voice firm, carrying a weight that had evolved from restraint into resolve. You manipulated both of us, he said. And for what? Power? For stability, she answered. Power is merely its most reliable form. A pause followed, and for the first time, uncertainty edged her composure. You have nothing now, Adrian said quietly. Whatever influence you held ends here. Lady Beatrice studied him, then Eliza, her expression shifting into something less certain, though not entirely defeated. You believe that because you have uncovered the design you are free of it, she said. But you are already within it. The question is not whether you remain bound, but whether you choose how. The words lingered, unsettling in their implication. Eliza turned slightly toward Adrian, her voice low, yet unwavering. Then we choose. He met her gaze, and in that moment, the distance that had once defined them dissolved entirely, replaced by something far more dangerous, and far more certain. Yes, he said. We do. Lady Beatrice's smile faded, not into defeat, but into something colder, more measured. Then I look forward to seeing what becomes of your choice. She turned and left without another word, her departure as controlled as her arrival, yet the absence she left behind felt anything but empty. Silence settled once more, though it no longer carried uncertainty. Adrian exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting from the scattered papers to Eliza. This changes everything, he said. It clarifies everything, she replied. He studied her then, not as an obligation, not as a stranger, but as an equal standing within the same truth. I misjudged you, he said quietly. And I misjudged your silence, she answered. A faint, almost imperceptible shift passed between them, something no longer guarded, yet not fully understood. Outside, the storm had begun to subside, its distant echoes softening into stillness, as though the world itself paused in anticipation of what would follow. Adrian stepped closer, his voice lower now, carrying a sincerity that had not existed before. If we are to remain within this, we do so together. Eliza held his gaze, her answer not immediate but deliberate. Yes, she said at last. And in that quiet agreement, something far more binding than their vows took shape, something chosen, not imposed. Yet as the last of the thunder faded, a single thought remained, unspoken but undeniable. They had uncovered the truth, but they had not yet faced its cost. Morning did not arrive with gentleness, but with a pale, deliberate light that revealed rather than softened, as though the world itself insisted upon clarity after a night of concealed truths. The storm had passed, yet its residue lingered in the damp air and unsettled silence that drifted through Blackthorne House, touching every corridor with a sense of quiet reckoning. Eliza stood by the tall windows of the east wing, her gaze resting upon the gardens where white roses bent beneath the weight of lingering rain, their fragile elegance unmarred despite the storm. It struck her, not as coincidence, but as a reflection of something she had only just begun to understand, that endurance did not always announce itself with strength, but often with stillness. Behind her, the door opened without ceremony. You did not leave. Adrian's voice carried neither accusation nor surprise, only a measured awareness that felt, at last, unguarded. Eliza did not turn immediately. I considered it, she replied, her tone calm, though threaded with something more certain than before. But departure, under these circumstances, would have been an act of surrender, not freedom. He stepped further into the room, his presence no longer distant, though not yet familiar. And you do not intend to surrender, he said. She turned then, meeting his gaze with a steadiness that had evolved beyond quiet endurance into deliberate choice. No, she said simply. A silence followed, not strained, but reflective, as though both of them stood at the threshold of something neither had anticipated, yet neither could now ignore. The documents, Adrian said, his voice thoughtful. They confirm what she implied. This marriage was never meant to bind us to each other, but to bind us to something larger. Influence, alliances, expectations, none of which we were permitted to understand. And now we do, Eliza replied. Or at least, enough to choose whether we remain within it as participants, or as its architects. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in challenge but in recognition. You speak as though there is power in this. There is, she said. Not in what was arranged for us, but in what we decide to do with it. Adrian studied her for a long moment, the weight of her words settling into something he could neither dismiss nor fully resist. "You believe we can alter the design?" "I believe," Eliza answered, "that it was never meant to account for us acting together." The statement lingered, its implication clear. Together. The word carried a significance neither of them had yet spoken aloud, yet both understood. Adrian exhaled slowly, his posture shifting, not into reluctance but into resolve. "Then we do not dismantle what has been built," he said. "We redefine it." Eliza inclined her head slightly, her expression composed, though her eyes held a quiet intensity. "Yes." The decision, once spoken, settled between them with a certainty that felt almost inevitable. The days that followed unfolded not with spectacle, but with deliberate precision. Invitations were accepted, appearances maintained, yet the dynamic had shifted in ways subtle enough to evade immediate notice, yet profound enough to alter every interaction. Where once there had been distance, there was now coordination. Where silence had divided, it now concealed intent. At a gathering held beneath the opulent glow of crystal chandeliers, society watched with renewed curiosity, eager to discern whether the fractures rumored within the Blackthorne marriage would widen or mend. Eliza entered on Adrian's arm, her presence composed, her bearing no longer tentative, but assured in a way that commanded attention without demanding it. The sapphire brooch rested at her collar once more, no longer a symbol of mystery, but of quiet defiance. Whispers rose as they always did. "She remains." Then the rumors were false. Or perhaps more true than we imagined. Adrian did not acknowledge them, though his grip upon Eliza's hand was steady, deliberate, as though the gesture itself carried meaning beyond mere formality. Lady Beatrice approached, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes revealed a calculation that had not yet surrendered to defeat. "Your Grace," she said smoothly. "Mrs. Blackthorne. How reassuring to see that appearances remain intact." "Appearances," Adrian replied evenly, "are often misunderstood." "Indeed," she said, her gaze shifting briefly to Eliza. "And yet, they are all society has to rely upon." Eliza met her look without hesitation. "Then perhaps society has relied upon too little." A pause followed, delicate and charged. Lady Beatrice's smile returned, though it held less certainty than before. "You have grown confident." "I have grown informed," Eliza replied. The distinction was not lost. Adrian spoke then, his voice calm, yet carrying a quiet authority that drew attention without effort. "And with that understanding comes a clarity we were previously denied." "Clarity?" Lady Beatrice echoed. "Or illusion?" "Truth," Eliza said softly, though the word carried a weight that silenced further challenge. For a moment the balance shifted, not dramatically but undeniably. Lady Beatrice inclined her head, her composure intact, though her position no longer unassailable. "Then I wish you both success in maintaining it." She withdrew, not defeated but no longer in control. As the evening continued, the shift became more apparent, not in grand gestures, but in the subtle recalibration of perception. Where once Eliza had been regarded as an outsider, she was now observed with something closer to respect, or at least cautious recognition. Adrian, in turn, no longer held himself apart, his interactions marked by a presence that suggested not obligation but intention. Yet it was not society's perception that defined the true transformation. It was the quiet moments between them. Later, as the gathering dissolved into lingering conversations and fading music, Adrian guided Eliza toward the terrace, where the night air offered a reprieve from the scrutiny within. The gardens stretched beyond, their shadows softened by moonlight, the white roses luminous against the dark. "You have altered the course of something that was never meant to change," he said, his voice low, though free of the detachment that had once defined it. "We have," she corrected gently. He regarded her for a moment, the distinction acknowledged. "Yes." A silence followed, not empty, but filled with the unspoken weight of everything that had passed between them. "I was wrong," Adrian said at last, his tone steady, though carrying an honesty that felt almost unfamiliar. "Not in accepting this marriage, but in believing it could exist without meaning." Eliza's gaze remained steady. "Meaning is not imposed," she said. "It is chosen." "And if I choose it now?" he asked, the question quiet, though unmistakably sincere. She held his gaze, her answer measured, though certain. "Then it must be as more than obligation." He stepped closer then, not with hesitation but with intent, the distance between them closing in a way that no longer felt imposed but inevitable. "I thought," he said, his voice softer now, "that withholding myself would spare you from disappointment." "And did it?" she asked. "No," he admitted. "It ensured it." The honesty settled between them, unguarded, unembellished. Eliza exhaled slowly, the last remnants of uncertainty dissolving into something clearer, something chosen. "Then we begin again," she said. "Not as strangers," Adrian added. "Not as obligation," she replied. "But as something we define," he finished. The words did not demand resolution, they offered it. For a moment, neither moved, the space between them filled not with tension, but with possibility. Then, slowly, deliberately, Adrian extended his hand, not as a duke asserting claim, but as a man offering something far more uncertain and far more real. Eliza regarded it for a breath, the weight of every choice, every misjudgment, every quiet endurance culminating in that single, unassuming gesture. Then she placed her hand in his. The contact was simple, yet it carried a finality more profound than any vow they had spoken before witnesses. It was not binding, it was chosen. In the distance, the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, its pale gold breaking gently across the gardens, illuminating the white roses now fully open, untouched by the storm that had once threatened to break them. And as the light grew, so too did the understanding that what had begun in silence and separation had found its resolution not in grand declarations, but in something far more enduring. Two hearts, once guarded, no longer standing apart but choosing at last to remain.